You're too Asian. You're not Asian enough. Something that he has heard a lot. But what does it mean being raised with two completely different cultures? The meaning of finding identity. Something where Felix can tell you a lot about.
Hi, my name is Felix Zhang. I am half Chinese and half English, and I was born in New York, and I moved to Shanghai when I was about 3 years old. And I lived in Shanghai full-time till about 11 when I started boarding school in the UK while still living in China. And at about like 15, 16, that was the time we started transitioning to living full-time in the UK. But my mum and older brother currently live in China, while my dad, younger brother, and I live here in the UK. So growing up in China, it was quite interesting. There's a phrase in Chinese, 混血儿, which means, I guess, mixed blood kid, like a mixed kid. And that was kind of big because obviously there's a lot less, I guess, like, I don't know, immigration and foreigners there or something. So I was quite seen as kind of special in that sense. But like, it was quite a positive thing because I think in some ways it's almost seen as desirable to be mixed race in China. So they were like, wow, that's so cool, you're mixed. In the UK, definitely quite different. When I came to the UK, I was seen as Chinese, even though I was half. They were just like, you're Chinese now. But then obviously the Chinese or Asian people within the UK wouldn't fully see me as Chinese or Asian. So race was definitely a much more of like a talked about thing in the UK, which was very confusing for me when I first came here, because they'd be like, you're Chinese, and every time I'd be like, no, I'm actually half. Because to me it made a difference, but to them it didn't. So I felt like there was a lack of identity for a long time. But then kind of, I guess at one point I just realized I am both to some degree, but also I guess neither to some degree. And yeah, I think accepting that was quite good, and then just realizing I am who I am. I did have this like epiphany at uni where I was like brushing my teeth or something, and I looked in the mirror and I just noticed, wow, I look quite Chinese. And that's never happened before. That was like 20 years old, I think, or 19. So it's kind of late in life to be like, oh, I look Asian. So yeah.
As Felix voiced his experience in both countries, I asked him what the biggest cultural difference between England and China is. And having the privilege of being raised with both cultures, he tells us what's his favorite part in each.
Culturally, I was quite different. I think there's a lot of big cultural differences. Like in China, people tend to be a lot more respectful, like kids at school. And then you come to the UK and everyone's like ribbing each other all the time, and I didn't really get that. I was like, who are these people to just be rude to me and talk about my mother like that? This is something that you never experience in China, so it was a bit of a culture shock, I would say. And I was a bit confused by that for a bit. I think the respect is quite a good thing. It is also kind of dwindling in the current kind of Chinese cultural environment, but I think there's a historical understanding of like respect, and I think a lot of cultural values of China I feel myself more aligned to. I'm not sure if that's just because I grew up in China or that's just who I've become now, but I definitely think a lot of like, I guess, relationship values and stuff like that, I definitely lean to being kind of viewing the Chinese cultural ideas as more. My favorite thing about British, or I guess Western culture, is there's definitely like a freedom and openness to express things, which I think is one of the things that a lot of Asian cultures, like Chinese culture, is quite behind on. There's still an idea in Asian cultures where like, oh, you know, hold back your feelings, don't express your feelings because it's not right or it's not proper. I think in the West, there's a lot more focus on like actually expressing yourself and I guess speaking your mind. And I think that's a really good thing. When people like talk about their hometowns, I find it very kind of beautiful and nostalgic, but it's something that I don't fully feel. Like, I guess the closest thing to a hometown I have is Shanghai, because that's where I spent most of my childhood. But even then, we would come to England for school and visiting like my grandparents and stuff, and my uncle. So like, yeah, I guess I don't have like the fond memories of a hometown that a lot of people who grew up living in one place experience, which I guess I'm kind of jealous of, because it does sound kind of nice to have like, this is my town, city, or village that like I know like the back of my hand. I guess it doesn't help that Shanghai is like a very fast growing and evolving city, so like I feel like every time I go back, a lot of the staples that were there when I grew up are just gone. Yeah, I do definitely feel like London, well, this flat is, I guess, my home now. I've lived here for a few years and I kind of work out of here too, so this I would say is my current home. But I do call a lot of different places home. Like my dad's place in the countryside, I call home as well. And even my flat in Shanghai where my mum is, I also call home. So yeah, there's a few places that I just call home.
It is understandable that Felix has more than one place to call home. But between all the noise of the big city London, he tells us where he can find a peace which reminds him of China.
Any of the supermarkets in Chinatown, be it like Longfeng or you know, or even Tiantian local is pretty good. Yeah, there's a lot of, I think, for me it's like places that sell Chinese snacks.
This has become a quiet but powerful reflection on what it means to grow up in between, and how mixed identity is not half of anything, but something whole. Before we let Felix go, he shares his favorite Chinese saying.
Here's the thing, we had to memorize a lot of poems in Chinese school, and I remember only one of them, and it is actually a pretty good poem. It's by I think the most famous Chinese poet Li Bai. It's 床前明月光，疑是地上霜。举头望明月，低头思故乡. He was a traveling poet, and I think he's talking about staying in this room, and he's seeing the moonlight coming through the window, and it looks like frost on the ground, and he looks up at the moonlight, and then lowers his head to think about home. And obviously, I was in boarding school a lot, so I definitely felt homesick occasionally. So I guess the poem's speaks to me a bit, I guess.